Hello, this is an exciting video to be shooting. I would like to introduce the version 2.0 firmware for the Arbor. Yeah, this has been a long time coming. It's available to download and install right now from the website. There's new production stock now shipping out, which comes with the version 2 pre-installed. Yep, back in stock. It's been a while because I had to deal with chip shortages and then updating hardware so we could use processors that were available. It's been a whole thing. So yeah, we're back in action with Arbor. Yeah, this is a substantial upgrade. Yeah, Sebastian's been working on this for the past few years. It's been a long process, so your patience is very much appreciated. And yeah, we're all just very excited to be able to share this. With the launch, we're doing the same thing we did with the Loopers version 2 update, where there's for a limited time, there's an expansion upgrade pack that's available. And inside that, we have a copy of the new printed quick start guide, which we had to go to an actual stapled booklet now because it's less of a quick start, more of a long start, but it covers all the new stuff in it. There is also a USB expander, which I won't fully unwrap it just so I can actually put this one back on the shelf. One of these, same one that's shipped with the Looper, gives you front access to the USB drive because a lot of the new features, it really opens up a lot of capabilities with having front access to USB. The expansion pack will also ship with a pre-flashed SD card, so you just swap that out for the one in it, and that's you good to go. It's running V2. There's also, for a limited time, until that's the screw bags. That's not the other baggie. Here we go. Here we go. So with the expansion packs ships one of these guys, the white USB drives. So we're doing the same thing we did the Looper, where we've produced an entire sample library for the Arbor, which has been a really fun process. So Jimmy's taken lead on that in-house as our in-house recording engineer, and yeah, he's done some really incredible work on this one. There's some really interesting collections of soundscapes and instruments in this. So for short-term, limited period, these are going to be a short-term exclusive on the USB drives that ship with the expansion pack. So anyone that does upgrade via this method, that's a little bonus perk. Eventually they'll be the same as the Loopers sample library. They'll be up on the website, free to download. Not sure of the time frame of that yet because I'm shooting this in advance of all this happening. But yeah, so that is the plan, and I don't know the runtime of this video. I think it's going to be a long one. My plan at the moment, it's going to be broken up into sections, so it's going to be there are now 6 core factory presets that are accessible on the Arbor. I'm going to work through them one at a time, but I think the first one, which is kind of the classic Arbor behavior, I'm going to very much use that as a means of creating a new concise reference video for the Arbor. So yeah, my aim is to use this video as a replacement for the original Arbor video. So yeah, if you're new to this module, then this should have all the information you need. There will be some supplementary videos going out at the same time. I'll do a dedicated one on how to update the firmware, sample loading, and yeah, there's a lot to include. So there's certain things that I've decided to keep to their own self-contained videos for this. But I'll stop talking now and cut camera, and then start talking more about other stuff to do with the Arbor. So thank you all for your patience. I'm very excited to share this with you. Hope you enjoy. Cheers. Okay, so before this video properly starts with the actual sections going into depth on the Arbor, I thought it would be quite useful to have a brief rundown of what's new with the V2 firmware. So first up, grain count. Grain count is now effectively doubled what it was in V1. Same sort of idea. There are two engines running in parallel. There's the internal engine, which is controlled in the intensity knob. Then there's the external engine, which is striked from the button or externally clocked. Each of these engines now aim for an average sounding grain count of 44 each. So we're now up at an average of 88 grains total if you're clocking and running internal. In practice, the grain count's actually considerably more than that, because the engine itself, which has been completely rewritten by Sebastian from scratch, it's got a lot of efficiencies and some really clever ways that it does grain management. So, for example, if you're going from a really long grain size down to a really short one, if you're running maximum intensity and hitting that average of 44 at length, if you bring that length down, new grains are having to come in and it's having to recycle the old ones. So the oldest one gets terminated and reused for its capacity, but instead of just ending, it goes into a fade out phase. So you'll still hear it as it decays out naturally, while the new grains are coming in. So it means that in practice the older grains will sustain underneath the new grains coming in. So yeah, I think the headroom it's an approximate doubling of what it can actually do. So if that's 44 per engine, so that's up to 88. If that's doubled, that's a lot of grains. It's yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, the engine is very well considered for this upgrade. Everything overall is much tighter, much more precise. The grain size now gets down to 5 milliseconds at a minimum, versus the version 1, which was 40 milliseconds. So this kind of gets into new territories completely. Like if we're going from larger grains down to these like truly micro sizes, we get to very different sonic timbres. Yeah, the arbor can do stuff now that it absolutely could not do with the V1. It's very exciting. So I'll go into some depth and some demonstrations of the articulation you can get from the new tightness of the grain engine. Sample management. This is a major upgrade. So there are now ways of working with curated samples that is much more powerful, much more elegant. So we've got a method called scenes, where you can now save a scene which includes all 6 layers audio content. So that's, say you've got a patch going where you've sampled in particular curated audio for a performance, you can now save this as a scene, which will encapsulate all the audio files as well as the configuration of the arbor itself. So essentially saving a preset or custom preset if you've got a particular configuration set. Yeah, it's very cool. So on the USB drive there are scenes folders that can be curated either on a computer, just copying the audio in, and you can load that directly onto the arbor, or you can save directly onto it as well. So there are 36 slots for scenes, and each scene contains 6 samples. So it's yeah, there's a lot of samples that you can load in. In addition to that, there's a library folder. So instead of loading and saving scenes, which is all 6 layers at once, you can kind of micromanage. You can get in and you can now get in and clone audio between different layers. So if you want to make a short-term backup, you could copy the content from alpha to gamma or delta and just shift stuff around. On top of that, you can also load audio individually, sample by sample, into the particular layers that you want. Yeah, it's very powerful. Yeah, there's a sample library we've produced as well for the arbor. It's going to be available, I think I said earlier in the video, short-term exclusive with the expansion packs, which give you a pre-flashed micro SD card, so it's just a quicker process to upgrade. Eventually these will be the same as the looper. We're going to publish these for free on the website. Not sure what the time frame is from this moment in time, because I'm shooting this ahead of the launch itself, so at some point. But yeah, there's some really cool stuff in the sample library. Jimmy took lead on producing these, and yeah, he's come up with some really interesting capabilities. Yeah, some really interesting sounds. Okay, what else we got? Accumulative recording. So there's now a mode where you can have the record head stop start. So if you hit capture, record in a bit, pause it, keep going. So you can curate and micromanage content within a single layer on its own. That's very cool. This has been showcased as the 6 factory preset, but it's also a mode that you can toggle on and off on the fly. ONSET detection modes. This is new. We've got a couple of extra now. We've got epsilon and zeta. So these are ways of curating the behavior of the trigger output and also how the ONSET detection behaves. Yeah, again, these will be showcased in sections of this video. Stereo, that's a big one. So the arbor can now run in true full stereo. The ONSET input, which has always been a silent input where that's just doing ONSET detection and spectral analysis for automating capture. This can now be repurposed for audio input, so you can use this as left-right or right-left, depending on where you are in reference to your speakers. Yeah, the whole grain engine is now stereo. And if you're loading in stereo samples, you can set it to the stereo mode and it will play true stereo grains where grain fires and you've got discrete content left and right. Yeah, this has opened up so many more possibilities. Yeah, I was saying about Jimmy producing the sample library. There are now a collection of samples within this that are mid-side encoded, so there are tricks that we found that if you're playing with the panning control using a MOD CV to control the panning spread, when this is applied in stereo mode with stereo audio source, you can get cancellations or yeah, some just really interesting ways of working that you can essentially hide audio within the audio sample. Yeah, I think I'm going to do a dedicated video on this alone because it's a really powerful technique. So in that I'll aim to show techniques of how to encode mid-side processed audio or stuff like that. Yeah, it's going to be fun. I don't want this video to be any longer than it has to be, so I'll do that in a separate section. What else we got? We've got follow mode. So follow mode, which was a feature of a feature of V1 as well. It's now greatly expanded to having bipolar direction movement, but there's also a mechanism for turning it into essentially like a ring buffer recorder. So the arbor now is completely opened up into new granular delay territories, which is really fun. It's one of these features that the mechanics were sort of implemented before we realized the scope of what it could now do. Yeah, it's quickly become one of my, one of my favorite modes of operating with the arbor in certain ways. So yeah, there will be an example of that in this video. Yeah, there's a lot to go through. So yeah, I'll be coordinating this video in sections, 6 sections, one for each preset, and but the first preset, which is the Arbor Classic, that's going to be the more ultimate section. That's going to cover all the features and functionality of the Arbor. So the aim is this video will replace the previous Arbor video. So yeah, let's get into it. Hope you enjoy. Okay, so let's dive in. This is going to be the first of 6 sections through this video, although this will probably be the bulk of the video. So I'm going to be going through preset by preset. So we're looking at preset 1, which is the Arbor Classic preset. So yeah, this will kind of just be a more of a how-to Arbor or getting started type video. So I'll be covering details of what's new for those that are upgrading from V1 to V2. But it's also going to serve as a bit of an overall review or recap for those just want a refresher, or those coming to the Arbor completely new, we'll go through all the nuts and bolts, all the features, functionality. So here we go. So I have this Arbor completely initialized to factory defaults. This is how it will be if you take it straight out of the box, brand new, or if you perform the upgrade from V1 to V2, it's going to be this blank slate completely. There is also a factory reset command, which is slightly different from what it was in the V1. So I'll do it just now, just for reference sake. If I press and hold Shift, then Capture, and then tap Strike, I believe it's 8 times. Yeah, so you saw the interface change slightly, and it's now essentially soft locked. So this is it doing an internal reset. This is quite a useful starting point. So because the Arbor's got quite a lot of parameters under the hood, so you can do custom presets. There's a lot of things that it could just be flipped. You could have phase inversion, you could have it in stereo versus mono, you could have it in follow mode. There's a lot of different variations. This will clear things to a blank state. There we go, that's us back up and running. So yeah, if you're away from your system for a few days, you come back and you don't remember exactly where it's at, you want to start fresh, this is quite a good way to do it. So a couple of things to bear in mind with this approach is there are now, with the V2, there are 6 fundamental factory presets for core operation. So they're like a replication of the original 4 modes that used to be in the Arbor V1. So they're in there, plus a couple of extras. So it covers a lot of bases. These 6 preset memory locations, they can actually be saved to as scenes, so audio and preset configuration. If you save to them and do the factory reset, that's essentially volatile memory space, so it will be reinitialized to all the factory defaults. So just keep that in mind. So especially if you're borrowing a friend's Arbor, for instance, and you do a factory reset just so that you've got a blank slate, get permission first before you wipe any memory. Okay, so the top section here is our input and output stages. Audio input in the top left. I'm going to patch this up with just a basic voice from the CSL as our main audio source for these examples. Output is top right, so I'll come out of that and go straight into my cure, to my output module. Here we go. So this is just a slightly modulated wavefold voice. I've got an LFO through index modulating the wavefold symmetry. So as opposed to just a really rigid static tone, it's got a bit more movement to it. Okay, so input pot top left, input level pot top left. So this is the same circuitry that's in the looper module and its input stages. So this works very nicely in the Arbor. It's the same approach for ensuring that the audio codec will never be allowed to hard clip. It will never saturate in hard clipping distortion. So it's essentially like a soft limiter, so you can really push very high amplitude signals in, and it will just smoosh it if it gets well out of range. So it means there's a good range of being able to drive it in, and it will just stay warm. Output level and dry wet mix in the center here. So all the way dry, we're just hearing the throughput source signal. If I go fully wet, we hear nothing because there's currently nothing captured into the Arbor. So let's capture something into the Arbor and explore the grain engine. So down here is essentially like the transport control section of the audio playback. So this is the scan pot, which you can see as I'm moving it, it's scanning the playhead across the display. So this display, it represents a 10-second audio buffer, audio layer. So this is the mechanic of the Arbor fundamentally, is you capture and curate audio into one of up to 6 parallel layers. So the display itself is blue at the moment, so that's indicating we're in the alpha layer, and each one has got its own color scheme and is selected through the layer pot here. The colors, they're largely just aesthetic, but they do serve a purpose. I think over time I've definitely gotten used to a certain workflow where I might keep more textural stuff in orange and harmonic stuff in in magenta, and then I don't know, melodic stuff in blue or violet. So it just kind of, it's there as a useful reference point for curating what sort of sound sources you might apply to certain layers, and all the audio can be pulled from any of these layers at any point, so it kind of just merges together. I'm going to keep it in alpha just for this example because, you know, blue looks good on camera. Okay, so capturing audio in, I can hit the capture button. That's going to start recording audio into this buffer. We'll see a record head move along the layer or the display itself. Gate input, so that can be used for external gate control over it, or you could also use onset detection and have audio transients, self-trigger capturing, stuff like that. So I'm going to keep it simple, just going to hit capture and record it in. For recording this, I'm actually going to patch in harmony as voltproctive source to my CSL, and I'm just going to play up a minor pentatonic scale. So as it captures in through this 10-second audio, it's just going to have this sort of minor pentatonic arpeggio as a range of notes through the layer, and that will give me some reference point in location for where I'm pulling grains from. One other thing to note: once the record head reaches the end and goes off-piste, it's going to keep recording. So there's a reason for this. This is access to 10 seconds of audio, but if you imagine putting the playhead to the end, if that's the end of your audio file, there's nothing to play from. So it actually captures 10 seconds plus a grain's worth, and the maximum grain length being 3 seconds. That means we have 10 seconds plus 3 seconds, so we'll have 13 seconds record time. So let's move ahead. I'm going to hit capture and then just play through my minor pentatonic. And once the record head passes the playhead, which will be here, we should actually hear some grains starting to play over the top. So here we go. This is me now captured audio into my buffer. So if I want to go fully wet signal, I could either cut my input audio, play between the dry and wet. So this is dry signal, wet signal. Or I could just mute my input, unpatch it completely, and now we're running from just the arbor itself as an audio source. Okay, so grain playback, quite a lot of parameters to work through. So I'm going to come up from my transport controls. So I'll come back to spray. We're using scan now to sweep through the audio buffer. Just above scan and spray we have intensity and length. So length defines the length of the grains, which will go up to 3 seconds, as I said, and go down pretty short. We'll come to that. Intensity is the intensity of grains, so the number of grains that are playing concurrently. So if I turn it down, we'll get a slower rate of grain playback. The intensity control itself, its maximum intensity is the 12 o'clock position. So it's almost like an attenuverter type parameter. So going fully left or fully right, fully anti-clockwise, fully clockwise, that's going to give us 0 intensity. So 0 on the outside, coming up to maximum intensity. There's a difference in polarity in how it behaves. So if I go left, bring the intensity down, we'll hear we've got a regularity to it. If I do the same thing and go clockwise, it's a bit more sporadic. So this is a stochastic timing. So if you want more randomly proportioned grain playback, a bit more sporadic layering than bringing it up from clockwise will give you random timing versus rigid timing. So rigid timing, we can hear that grain rate coming through as a bit more of a reference point. So I'll get intensity to a point where it's very much there's a period to it that's regular, and that's defining a certain rate of the playback of this grain count. If I reduce the length, that's going to be shortening the length of the grains, so it's going to speed up the rate. There we are. So the intensity down quite low. We don't have any direct overlapping in the grains, but as I bring the intensity up, that's where the granular synthesis aspect comes in, where you're layering up lots of clusters of these grains, so you're kind of blurring the lines. So it's not just straight transitions. That's where the granular time stretching capabilities come in. This was a linear scale that I played in, but I've now got this in, and I can freeze frame it at any point and infinitely sustain it. Cool. Okay, so grain intensity, grain length. If I go smaller, you can hear that starting to change the timbre of the playback. Like, we're still clearly hearing the pitch definition. So intensity and length. What I'm going to do next, I'm just going to patch my secondary output to my cure. So I'm going to essentially patch it in stereo using the two outputs. It's not, especially in the Arbhar Classic mode, you can patch it in stereo, so you'll get like a really extreme stereo width of the grain distribution being hard left, hard right, unless you patch it to a mixer and pan, with it brought in a bit, or panned, in a more curated way. When you're patching in mono, the top output is actually receiving a mono sum of both if this is unpatched. So that unpatched, and it's going through the normal pin of the jack and summing in at the top. So if I patch to the bottom one, just with a dummy cable, with half the intensity, because half the grains are now coming out of this output going nowhere, and half the grains are coming out of this output. The distribution between the two outputs is coin toss. So if I now patch this here, you can hear, especially with lower intensity, we're hearing that much more grains one after the other. But then as I bring up intensity, it's starting to just blur and just merge together. Okay, we'll keep the length and intensity about there. Let's jump up just above them to two more of the grain parameter controls. So this is grain windowing. It's texture is another term for this in a lot of granular synth applications. So this is a dynamic grain window. So if you think of each grain as being an instance of playback of the audio that's going into its own VCA with its own envelope generator. So this grain windowing control defines the shape of that envelope. So if I'm in the center at the moment, this is a Gaussian curve, so we're getting a nice soft fade in and natural fade out. So that's why everything feels and sounds very smooth. Rotate it anti-clockwise. Things are getting a bit more prominent. It's building up. The amplitude's gone up a little bit. So this is a square windowing where it's just on. It's just playing a chunk of audio. There is a bit of built-in dynamic compensation. So between Gaussian going to square, I think the overall amplitude is brought down slightly for a single grain for the square windowing, and then as it morphs to the Gaussian curve, the peak amplitude's higher, but the average RMS of the grain is lower. So it's compensated between the two. And then if I move over to the right, this is getting to ramp, or like a percussive impulse envelope shape. This one's going to be most noticeable with the next parameter I'm going to look at, which is this tall trimmer on the right. This is grain direction. So if I'll bring intensity down a bit. So this pot all the way to the left, and this is forcing every grain to play forward direction. So this is a pot that defines probability for coin toss chance of playing the grain forward direction or in reverse. So if it's in the center, we're going to have a 50-50 chance per grain of it playing forward or reverse, which is going to be most noticeable with this ramp grain shape, because if I slow it down a bit more, keep it forward only, we can hear we've got that transient impulse. So it's like the note starts and then fades out. If I go fully reverse, then it's reversed the grain shape as well. What's not so noticeable here, because we're just using a waveform or a static tone, the audio is actually reversed itself inside that grain. Actually, a good way that I can show this is if I slow it down, go to a maximum grain length. There we go. So per grain, we're getting that C to the E flat. If I reverse the direction, so now the amplitude's fading out and we've got the notes reversed. So grain direction, grain windowing, intensity, length. Okay, let's come down and take a look at this bottom center parameter, the spray control. So this is where the granular synthesis really starts to shine, I think. It's introduction of spray. So as we can see on the display, as I bring up spray, we're getting these indicators, these light particles that are depicting where in the buffer, where in the audio layer audio grains are being pulled from. So you can see as I turn up, it's spraying away from the defined starting point. So this is depicting the location approximate that the grain's being pulled from, forward from the scan position. Each grain's going to be playing at the defined length. So we can see as I turn the length up, we're elongating the playhead itself. So that's an indication of the grain duration, the grain length, and sprays showing the offset starting point. So this is something that I think is potentially quite unique to the Arbhar's granular engine, which is the Lexer method of granular, developed by Sebastian Lexer, who's the brain behind the Arbhar's engine. It's always working forward from the defined position. So especially like the way that Sebastian's developed and performed with this granular engine over many years is working proactively. So if he's a piano player, so he plays a lot of prepared piano. So if you play something in, the Arbhar engine will then like look for that and be able to like self-capture and always actively start capturing based on input. So same thing with the spray. It's always like pushing forward in time. until you reach a certain point. So you can see here, I've got spray all the way up, and it kind of doesn't matter where I've got scan, it's pulling grains from across the entire layer, but it does it from this controlled spray from the start point forward. So one thing to keep in mind with this is if I have my scan quite far, through the audio layer, it's going to start pulling behind more readily. So say I'm here, that's only maybe a couple of seconds to the end, and then that extra 3 seconds worth following. So once it hits a point where it's pushed as far as it can towards the end of the buffer, that's where it's going to start like opening up in reverse. So this is a thing of note that I've seen in a few arbhar videos out there online that I think scan is very often the go-to parameter to tweak dynamically because it's got real-time visual feedback on it. But the thing to keep in mind in this context here, spray all the way up, it doesn't actually matter where my scan pot is because it's not affecting where the grains are coming from, because we're at essentially full entropy. It's just pulling from across the entire layer. So this becomes a really nice performative element where I can be pulling grains from everywhere, creating in this case a more harmonic polyphony from the linear arpeggio that I played in. I can move my scan position and then focus in spray to a particular note, go back out to full spray. So what I find, I'm going to throw in a little patch example here, because this is something that I've been playing with quite recently. It's quite fun. Is essentially automating that performative element. So the trick I found to do this, if I go here, use this knock, I'm going to set it to cycle, and I'm going to use the CV to counteract the spray pot. So I'm going to have the spray set full, and I want this envelope to basically just like bring the spray down to 0, so that we're going from full extremes across the layer to a focal point. So to do that, I'll use the envelope and I'm going to invert it. So I'll do that using the third channel of this Karn. So that's an attenuverter. Come out from here and patch this to the spray CV. Slow it down a bit. As the envelope reduces, we go back out to full spray and then recenter it all. So the reason I'm doing it with an inverted envelope is I can use the end of cycle trigger here from this knock and use that as a clock reference. So I'm going to use that to clock sample and hold. What I'll do actually, I'm going to use just a full range audio signal as the peak-to-peak reference, just so I've got a slightly wider output amplitude from this sample and hold, and I'll patch that to my scan CV input. So now we can see every time the spray hits its peak, where the CV's at 0, so it's basically sprays back to full, it's clocking the sample and hold and picking a random position in the scan. And this whole action could be slowed down more if I want a slower envelope. So this is spreading back out, new clock, and hopefully a new random position next time. Yeah, quite a fun patch. Okay, we'll get back to the actual video content now. Okay, so far I think pretty much everything that I've shown should be pretty familiar to anyone that's got some existing experience with the Arbor running V1. Yeah, a lot of the interface is largely unchanged. It should be very familiar for anyone that's upgrading, so it'll be very quick to get familiar with. A lot of the changes are at the engine level, like it's really fundamental that there's some new timbres that are now available from it, just because everything's tighter, everything's bigger and better under the hood. So we launched the Looper V2 firmware last November, and its video was very different. I think I had to showcase the way that we completely re-implemented the user interface into the new engine. The Arbor, there are some critical differences, but a lot of the top level interface is largely unchanged, which should be quite easy to get up and running quickly. So let's talk tech spec of what is fundamentally different under the hood. This has been a multi-year development, which has Sebastian's not just run lead on, like he's been the sole developer behind the whole thing from the get-go. So I mean, the Arbor's software engine, like it's existed, it predates the Arbor hardware, like our collaboration, by many years. So it's designing the Arbor, originally it was a case of coming together and me bringing ideas to the table in terms of what we both felt would make for a strong user interface and dedicated hardware implementation of the Lexer method of Granular. So I think we both felt very good with how the interface and the core mechanics are still there. So it's just been improving lots of details behind the scenes. So similarities: the V1, it ran 2 parallel granular playback engines, so that's ultimately the same. We're listening to one engine currently, which is internally clocked grains coming from the intensity pot. The secondary engine, it's controlled from the strike input, or the strike CV gate, so you can be clocking parallel grains to it. So on V1, the internal engine, it could generate up to 22 grains, and it could be a further 20 grains coming from the strike engine. Each of these engines on V2, they can both hit up to a target of, or an average of 44 sounding grains simultaneously, which, so we're at more than double in those raw spec alone. But in practice, it's not quite as simple as that. Like the headroom of each granular engine is actually considerably more. If we think about the target as being 44 sounding grains, the complication comes in when there's dynamic variation of length of the grain. So if we let's play it. So we've got length all the way up at full 3 seconds. So this means that we're getting up to 44 concurrent grains of this Gaussian curved, Gaussian windowed enveloping and layering. As I bring the length down, the new grains playing, they're happening faster, so it's having to essentially terminate the older content to free up bandwidth and headroom for the new grains to play. It's a bit of a juggling, it's a juggling act with getting that smooth, and that's where a lot of the work's gone into. And what happens now, the headroom for each engine is essentially doubled, so theoretically it could be up to 88 sounding concurrent grains, and that happens when you quickly make adjustments going from long grains down to short grains. It's seamless, like there's not an immediate jump or cut where older grains are having to be terminated early. Like it's when a grain's terminated, from my understanding at least, it doesn't end immediately. It goes into a phase where it will just naturally fade out, and it's during that fade out that's when the new grain's able to start, so you can actually have the new grains coming in and playing and cycling and running while the old content's still in its fade out stage. So I guess the the actual technical total grain count is well into triple figures when you're looking between the two engines. Yeah, so a factor of that limitation of sounding grains, where if you're shortening them down, the shorter you go, the faster grains are having to cycle and be the engine's having to manage playing these concurrent audio clips. The V1, the shortest grain size was down to 40 milliseconds. That's now reduced all the way down to 5 milliseconds on the V2 engine, which allows for some completely new sonic territories. I'm going to change the windowing to ramp and keep our grain direction forward, because that's going to give us like the most sort of noticeable percussive grains to sort of build up from. So I'll get the intensity to a point where it still sounds like it's a one at a time stream of grains. And then as I reduce the length, that's then getting shorter and shorter, so everything's happening faster and faster. So it means that at a certain point we go from larger grains containing audio content, which is the main focal point of what you're hearing, the sonic character, to the grains becoming the sound source themselves in terms of the windowing, because at a certain point, if we think about again the concept of the audio being the sound source and it's playing a section of that, and each grain is effectively through a VCA controlled by an envelope. If that envelope gets so short, if you're getting into like 5-second envelope times, that's not enough time to convey any actual information of what the source audio is. Especially if it's like more of a bass tone or like a lower pad. Yeah, like the wavelengths of the frequencies, they're going to be longer than that 5-second window duration. So at this point, we start to get tonal artifacts or tonal characters coming from the actual grain rate itself. So yeah, we're kind of getting into wavetable territories while it's staying distinctly granular. Which, yeah, the V1 was just not capable of doing, of getting to that lower level. So it's interesting because these are, timbres, these are sonic characteristics that are not the most pleasant subjectively, depends on context, but to the extent that I think like when we were playing with it, it's like, is this a good idea? Is this now broken? Is this now going into ugly territories that you wouldn't necessarily want the engine to be able to do? But I think it's it's a spectrum. It's contrast. Like we can go from a really tonal, nice, time stretching and sort of more of an audio effect of granular playback of source audio to that sort of lower level of digital noise, which is pretty cool, being able to go from that level to quite a contrast. And the other thing as well, that considering other sound sources within modular, like the CSL, like it can get to some really nasty, arguably unmusical territories, but it doesn't necessarily need to be musical in every instance. They're sound design tools. So I think when we realize that's what's going on, like you can hear the tones of that going from single grain impulses to hearing those tones coming in. It's pretty cool. Let's go to square windowing. almost like a digital noise source. And we're adding variation of pitch in as well. And that's all happening twice. This is, so far we're just listening to the internal engine, so externally clocking it, that's going to be doubling that grain count as well. Cool, so that's the granular engine. The wavetable engine is completely rewritten as well. So this is, if we're going from length all the way up down to much smaller, it does the same thing where it will transition from grain size into landing on a static tone. So, like before, depending on what you're listening on, I'll pull this to mono just so we're hearing a truer representation of the wavetable waveforms. This is I captured in at quite a low amplitude, so this is going to be quite a soft sound overall. What I'll do, I'll jump to another layer. Let's go with beta, and I'm just going to capture in essentially noise. I'm just going to blow at the microphone and just try and get some really aggressive high amplitude stuff that will become the wavetable source. Go. Keep double, and I'll scratch in some more sounds as well. Okay, let's add in some random voltage. Now using audio captured into the buffer as a single cycle waveform wavetable source. There's some really, I can't remember all the details off the top of my head, but Sebastian's gone pretty deep on this new wavetable engine alone. Like, it's really much smoother overall than the V1's engine. Okay, bringing up spray, so this is now adding its own built-in deviation. I think the direction control is almost like a slew parameter, so I think like when it's changing and morphing, it's happening faster. I think if you bring this up, it's kind of slowing and the morphing happens a bit more. Yeah, pretty cool. So that's the wavetable engine. What happens when you reduce the grain size all the way down, and it will just dynamically transition into that from granular to wavetable. Okay, let's talk pitch controls on the Arbor. There are three input sources essentially. There's the volt per octave jack for CV, there's the main pitch pot, and then there's a pitch deviation pot at the top. So let's start with the main pitch pot. So the way that the Arbor works, which is fundamental to the Lexer method for granular, but is how the pitch is applied, is it's essentially a per grain engine, where every time a grain's firing, it's got a handful of different parameters in spec that define its life cycle. So like there's 5 parameters. So there's scan, there's position in the buffer, there's the length, the grain windowing, the direction, and then the pitch. So when a grain plays, it's playing with all this information, sort of known ahead of time. So every time a grain fires, it's looking up the current position of all these parameters and how it should sound. Which does mean that when you're adjusting the pitch, the responsiveness of pitch deviation is going to be dependent upon these parameters, like most importantly, length. So if I pull my spray all the way down so that I have just a static single note from within this buffer, now if I repitch it, there's a bit of a lag behind it, and that's because I've got quite a long length of grain. So it means that if that's 2 to 3 seconds, that's quite a amount of time to wait for new grains to come in and replace it at the new updated pitch. So if I want higher responsiveness, I need to get down to shorter grains. And now the pitching responds more immediately and kind of sounds a bit more natural in terms of like how you'd expect a pitch control to function over like an oscillator voice, something like that. So that's much more responsive further if I go to much shorter grain counts. But again, that's affecting my timbre, so there are a lot of decisions to be made when you're manipulating pitch on the arbhar, like how you want to use it, whether it's being used as more of a synthesis engine. In this case, I've just got a tone recorded in, which I can then repitch or play. So at the moment, that's me playing through a minor pentatonic that I recorded in as a linear map of notes. But if I use my same Voper octave source, this is me recreating that same sound, but using just the first note of the buffer. So yeah, that's the Voper octave input there. That's it used as a sort of faster, more responsive pitch control with shorter grains. Where the longer grains come into their own in this context as well is if I'm using it in a tonal way. So at the moment I'll keep this quite long grains. I'll keep it all the way down so it's just that first note, and I'm going to send random CV to my harmony here. So we're just getting a minor triad arpeggio, and I'll patch that to my Voper octave. So now, because I've got longer grains, they're taking a couple of seconds to sound, but then new ones coming in, they're playing at predefined intervals that I'm using, deriving from a quantizer. So every single note I'm turning into a polyphonic chord, I'm turning into a minor chord. So it means if I now scan through the layer, I'm harmonizing each one of my individual monophonic notes. So it's a method of true polyphony, essentially, with each grain having its own windowing and direction. One thing to bear in mind with the way the speed works, because it's vari-speed, so it's not like real-time streaming phase vocoding where you gain independence of pitch and speed, but it's almost like spectral resynthesis at that point. That's got a very distinctive sound for repitching audio, which can sometimes be quite unnatural sounding. I think with granular techniques for time stretching, you retain much more of a organic quality to the original sound source. I think that comes through this vari-speed method, where there is a bit of a caveat, where if I pitch up by an octave, say, then if I've got 1 second as my grain duration, that 1 second of audio is played twice as fast, so I've now halved my grain count. So built into the Arbhar's engine is a bit of dynamic compensation over grain length due to this. So if I increase the pitch, so I'm reducing the length of audio that I have, it will actually just nudge out a bit and try and keep the grain lengths a bit more consistent for it. So a thing to bear in mind with this, if let's go down to shorter grain counts. I'm going to change to sawtooth enveloped and forward direction. There we are. So we're just starting to hear that C to E flat notes. I'll nudge it back a little bit. So I keep it just that C note. Bring intensity back up. So now we're just hearing it monophonic. If I pitch it up a bit, then the grains are going to be shortening, but to compensate it's pulling a bit longer. So if I pitch up a bit, I should land at a position where I'm actually hearing the dyad, the C to E pitch from the source. There we go. So it's now become a chord because it's actually pulling source audio and nudging it forward a bit to try and keep the length the same. So that in itself can sometimes be used as a useful mechanic. I use it quite a lot if I'm using perfect octaves, like through Vote per Octave, to jump up and add octave spread or harmonization to a granular voice. I can position my source audio, or the scan position in that source audio, to give me more harmonization of additional notes just due to this as an artifact, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so that's the two primary ways of interfacing with pitch. The next one, I'll go back to a shorter grain count, more of a typical granular voice, and we're going to look at the pitch deviation pop. So I think the modern term for this sort of control is an attenuator randomizer. So it's kind of a expansion from an attenuverter, where it's centered at 0 and you kind of get two different polar extremes of behavior. Yeah, I'm not sure when that term became standardized, but it suits. So attenuator randomization. Center position, that's it fully attenuated, so there's no pitch deviation applied. If I adjust it to the left, I start to apply a windowed spread of random notes. So what I'll do, let's go back to being stereo, just to spread the sounds out a bit. So this can be quite a useful device just for adding a bit of width. Actually, what I'll do, I'll jump to another layer. Let's go yellow. Let's go with the delta one. What I'll do, I'll change voices and just put in a raw sawtooth. I'll go with just like a lower pitch going in. Let's keep something in key, so I'll maybe go like an octave below what we've had here. To audio rate. I'll cut this back to being mono. We don't get any phase cancellation or artifacts with the drive throughput. Okay, sawtooth wave, and I'm just going to capture this in to this layer. Just raw sawtooth wave source. And now I can cut that. There's a few interesting bits of content just being distributed across the layers now. Let's go back to stereo. So I've now turned this monophonic, just single buffer of sawtooth source into being stereo sawtooth. So you might notice is it does sound quite almost, to me, sounds a bit high pass filtered. It sounds fizzy, and what's the reason for that is I've got grain direction 50-50. So if I, there we go, change it to being all forward direction, it means that my grains are all playing forward. Because if we think about a sawtooth wave, if it's a perfect linear ramp, or in this case it's going to be ramping up that way, so it's an upward ramp. If we play that backwards, it becomes a downward ramp. So if we've got those two signals together, they're going to directly cancel each other out. So that becomes a process in itself. So keeping it all forward direction, it means that it's all layered sawtooth upward ramp waveforms. Almost slightly shorter length, just so we've got a bit more articulation over note control and intensity. So what's happening now, as I bring the length down, we're going from that sort of layered sawtooth voice to some interesting phasing and overtones coming through. And the reason for that is this is kind of key to the new stability of the V2's granular engine. Is everything's so precise, it's playing all these sawtooths from the exact same point. So it means that all these sawtooths are largely going to be landing close to being in phase. To knock them out of phase, I can bring up spray, because that's going to be pulling a random distribution of where the sawtooths are coming from. So it's now really tight unison, but the phase is shifting, so that's got quite a different timbre in itself. But then if we go back to my pitch deviation control, I'll keep spray all the way down, so we've got that really sort of metallic overtone characteristic. There we are. So I've just nudged that down a bit, just off axis, and that's just brought up a little bit of windowing that's adding pitch deviation per grain. So this is a really natural, true super saw type sound. So let's go back to a slower sample and hold rate into the harmony, push that into volt per octave. So granular super saw as a sound source. So yeah, it doesn't take much. It just takes a little bit of deviation just to add a little bit of pitch fluctuation between the grains. Of course, that gets up to much more dissonant, swarmy territories. Particular tone coming from the wave folder. Sounds almost like tremolo bowed strings in a section. I've performed with this behaviour quite a lot. Fairly recently, I did a few live sets with live electric violin going into the arbhar for live granular processing, and I would have it just sort of riffing on just melodic lines that I would play in, but it would go into that complete detuned chaos. Like, it would really turn into, yeah, really quite menacing sounding, like dissonant strings, like layered up, like going from a layered unison, like pulling from the same melodies to complete carnage. I'll maybe like splice in a section of that as a clip. But yeah, really fun thing, and that's just the left side of this pitch deviation pot. So let's look at the right side version of it. I'll go back to this sawtooth, longer grains, intensity down a bit, and yeah, I'll keep it single direction because that way we're not getting phase cancellation of the sawtooths. So the right side direction, this is unchanged from V1 for the Arbor Classic default behavior. It's a range that is divided into quantized pairs of notes. So the way it's defaulting is, as I turn it around, I'm adding a positive harmonization. So it's going to be going between this fundamental note and a minor second, then major second, minor third, major third, full chromatic going through up to octaves. But each one's got the parallel dyad, so it's up a minor second, down a major second, up a major second, down a minor second. So I'll try and pick through these. There we go, so that's thirds. There we go, that's quite nice. So that's fifths. Go back to thirds and sixths. So it's a way of like really musically adding in these diatonic harmonizations all the way up to octaves. So octaves is kind of maybe the most useful in especially when the content itself has got a tonality to it. So going through a minor pentatonic scale, if I was going with harmonizations that were thirds and sixes, then that's adding an additional layer of tonal harmony to the equation, which might not necessarily track diatonically through the notes in the buffer, if that makes sense. So octaves, it means I can move through and it's just giving me unison and octave harmonizations. So this side of the pitch deviation pot, this is something that's largely expanded with the V2 firmware. It can actually be completely customized in the preset files. So the default is this 12 divisions for chromatic harmonization pairs. I'm not sure off the top of my head what the actual maximum you can get, and I think if you can go up to like 24, and that's still enough range of precision you can get with the pot, because it's only half a turn of a pot, so you've only got 150 degrees of movement out of the full 300 degrees of the pot. But yeah, these can be dialed into any chromatic pairs as you go. So through the different presets, there's different defaults in there. So yeah, pitch control. Alright, let's talk about the strike input next. So this is the way of interfacing with the parallel secondary granular engine. I'm going to cut the intensity. I'll keep length up a bit. Pitch deviation still at octaves, that's quite nice, I'll leave it there. So this is me manually striking grains on top of, if there was an intensity level of the first grain engine, so that could be quite slow ticking over there. It should be quite audible here. Like, there's definitely a noticeable prominence in, I guess, amplitude intensity. So the strike engine, it's designed specifically to have a slightly accented amplitude. So it means that if you're using it for just adding additional grains over the top, they've got a slightly hotter amplitude. Okay, let's strike it independently and just see how this works. So input here, it's looking for any signal to trigger it. So this is just coming from the LFO of the oct. So this could be a way to control things based on particular timing. If I want grains to be playing specifically, or instead of having to rely on CV control and curation over hitting particular positions of the intensity, it's a completely manual or external way of timing grains. So a way that I found that's quite nice to do it is if I use the scythe here as my grain. So this being 4 parallel sawtooth waves, it's going to be peaking and giving me a bit more of a like stochastic timing. And if I bring the frequency up, then the rate of my oscillator becomes the rate of intensity, essentially. So basically the same as where we were at 2 seconds ago before I switched over to clocking versus intensity, but there should be a slight increase in the amplitude of that overall. But now if I run both intensity at max and rapidly strike, now we're pushing the grain count. Now we're sitting at up to 88 sounding grains as an average. Back to a Gaussian curve, and that should keep things a bit more reined in, a bit softer overall. So there's the possibility of arguing why are there 2 completely parallel grain engines? Like, why not just have the full 88 grain count controlled from intensity? There is a pretty core benefit to why this is a useful mechanic, and that's the aspect of the grains each engine having to regulate its own grain count. So as I was describing earlier in the video, like the length being up and then it restricting down to smaller grain counts, the engine's got headroom to keep up to double the target grain count running, so that there's a soft fade out, so that there's never an abrupt end when a grain gets terminated. This is happening independent per grain engine, so they're self-regulating the grains independently. So it means that if I have a position where I've got really long grains running, we'll go high intensity, as I bring it shorter, there is we don't retain that full 3-second length of maximum grain count, because they are being terminated and they're ending sooner, but they're doing it softly, like they're not abruptly ending. So it means that we can get these sort of like swells, which can be really useful, where I go from full length grains where it builds up to maximum capacity, and then as I bring it down, it's softening a bit. If I do this between the two grain engines, so now if I manually strike some that are at maximum length, and bring it down lower, I'm able to retain the full length of those grains because they've fired. I've not fired any more, so I've still got a headroom. You know, I only triggered 3 grains there. 4. So that's only 4 grains out of 44 that could be played. So I could use a signal as essentially like a burst generator. So I could patch in this psych briefly, unpatch, and then roll down the length. And there I've got the secondary grain engine like retaining the full length as they cut down. So there's ways of patching and coordinating control over the grain engine that is really taking advantage of this massive grain count that's now got. Yeah, so that's how to utilize the 2 parallel engines. Okay, I'm going to go to an unused buffer. Let's go with the orange one here, and pull the source out, and let's listen to. Let's play about with the built-in microphone and see what that does. So I've got balance stream wet and dry, and I've got my input level up. So now we're hearing sounds from the onboard microphone. The order of signal path here, we have the microphone that normals to the ONSET input, and then that further normals to the input. So it means that if I patch a signal to ONSET detection, this becomes a signal that's broken the normal from the microphone's now going nowhere. And this is a external signal going in, which is also normaling to the input. So if I use a sound source, that's going into ONSET, which is normalizing to the input. I could put in a separate cable and this be my input now. So I've now got the wavefolder signal going into the ONSET, which can normalize to the top, or if I patch that out, I've got microphone normaling to each of them. So yeah, the microphone is a bit of a quirky feature that was an idea that I threw in, I think in quite late stage development of when the Arbor was originally being designed. I think we had some of the contact mic modules in a few cases in the workshop, and they're really fun for just quickly getting some sort of sound source or envelope control or something into the modular without having to set up additional mics. So yeah, it was an idea that I thought I would try out, and it's ended up being quite a fun utility. And it's a really powerful sound source just on its own. If I'm just capturing scratches, snaps, claps, I'll just capture some stuff in, and we'll just play about with that a bit in the buffer and see how it sounds. Try that again. I'll drive the input a little bit hotter. I'm going to apply pitch deviation. There, those claps come out really nicely there because we're getting pitched in the reversal. So that's me just quickly jumping between the layers that I've captured through the course of this video so far. That's the original CSL wave folder. That was me just blowing into the microphone and scratching in for the original wavetable source. This is the recent one, and then the sawtooth wave. So just going maybe sparser grains, longer length, just spray all the way up and then just cycling through the different layers to just pull grains from different sources. The microphone just as a source, it just adds a lot of really immediate, interesting textural content. One word of warning though is, I'm entirely in headphones, so there's no feedback path of audio. If you are in a studio or in front of a PA system or something, like, feedback is very possible with it, so it's always quite a good practice to just on the fly maybe try and keep your input level pot down, because that way if you accidentally or intentionally unpatch from your input source, that's a direct path for a microphone straight through the arbor. So if I had any level of dry up, had the input up, that's a direct path, which is fine at the moment because there's no speaker active in the room, but yeah, it can be a bit risky at times. Okay, I'm going to keep with the microphone for a few more examples here, but I'm going to use it to show off undo, clear, and the dub control of the arbor. So I'll capture in just a run of microphone scratches again. Here we go. There we go. So I've got pitch deviation quite a bit, so it's just scattering it a bit. And I've got a good amount of audio through the range of the layer. So first up I want to show undo, where holding the shift button, you can see it's pulsing here. That's clear command, so that's indicating that there's currently audio in this layer. If I press that, it's going to clear it. I'll do that later on, but what I want to show is the ability for one layer of undo. So if I have the input level all the way down, if I start capturing again, it's going to be writing in nothing over the layer. Here we go. So that's just printed silence into the start of that layer. Now, if I did that accidentally, or if I was actually intending to do silence but didn't do silence, something like that, if I press and hold shift, I can see it's now pulsing yellow. So that's one layer of undo that I can achieve. So here we go, undo, and it's removed that printing of silence over it. Okay, when it's done. Okay, so let's look at the dub control. So dub is essentially for sound on sound recording into the layer. So I've currently got these textural sounds recorded through the layer. I'll put dub all the way up. This way I'm going to be recording new stuff in. It's essentially the dub layer, it's retaining maximum amplitude of the existing audio in the layer. So I'll hit capture again, and I'm just going to whistle a tone in and just record that in over the top, and that's going to have this crispy textural stuff retained there underneath. So here we go. There we go. So you can hear that starting to come in with retuned. It almost sounds like chimes because of the repitching. Okay, so that worked quite well, but I feel like the tonal element is getting washed out a bit by the textural stuff. So maybe I want the textural stuff to come down in level, and I want my whistle to be louder. So undo that. I'm going to reduce the dub level to a little bit below half. And I'll hit capture again, bump my input again, and then whistle another tone. There we go. So the whistle is now much more prominent, but the scratching still remained. Again, that's one layer of undo, because I can undo that last whistle recording. But then if I press strike again while shift's held, that's going to clear the buffer. So if I press once when it's yellow, that does undo. Oh, I double tapped it there accidentally, so that cleared it anyway. But if I capture that again just for reference, there's my voice in there slightly. There we go, it's pulsing white, so that's one layer of, there's no layers of undo, this is just clear, like that. So this is quite a fun little sound example, which something Sebastian's used quite a bit and shown me, so I'm ripping it off for this video. I'm going to keep it on the gamma layer. I've patched back to hard panned stereo. And I'm going to use the microphone and as my means of getting input, and the sound source itself is just going to be me flicking my fingernails in front of the microphone, which is kind of gross, but it'll sound hopefully quite cool. Let's see how this goes. Let me dub up, there we go. Okay, I'll just start capturing. There we go, so just sort of crispy crackles. What I'll do now, I'm going to pitch this down and add a bit of pitch deviation. Add some spray so it's pulling grains from across the layer. So yeah, it's starting to get quite crackly. Like, the aim is to get something quite bonfire-like. Yeah, so when it pitches down, it sounds quite woody. It sounds quite organic. What I'll do now, I'm going to put dub all the way up, and I'm going to do another pass where I'm just going to blow at the microphone and just try and get some like sort of low-end rumble, maybe like wind noise type stuff. See if that adds to it at all. Yeah, it's kind of quite effective, I think. Maybe do one more pass of finger clicks. Yeah, synthetic bonfire in stereo. So let's go into some depth on the onset detection that the Arbor features. I'm going to keep using the microphone for some of these examples, just out of convenience, but I've got some fun patch examples to show. Yeah, so the onset detection is quite a core feature to how the arbhar functions as a performative instrument. So it's the ONSET input is essentially a parallel audio input, the sense pot just being the level pot for that. So turning it up, that's allowing a certain amount of amplitude of audio seen at the ONSET input to get through to the analyzer. And it's looking for, it's more than just like a noise gate equivalent. So noise gates, well, traditionally they'll be looking for amplitude spikes. So it's just anything over an amplitude threshold, and then that will enact enveloping or gating. The ONSET detection, it's looking for more dramatic spectral changes. So changes in frequency content of the audio, which is really beneficial because it means that you could have a base level of more static audio in there. So it could be a pad, it could be a bass line, more static tones and drones, stuff like that. And then it's anything that dramatically differs from that. So it could be a transient or an impulse or a kick or a snare or something like that over a pad, and that will force the ONSET analysis to trigger, and that's what's going to do certain things. So in this case, the default behavior of preset 1 is that the ONSET detection will trigger capturing. So every time it senses a big enough change in spectrum, it will auto start capturing. So imagine piano notes. As soon as you play a new note or a chord, or hit the piano with a hammer, if you're so inclined, then that's going to trigger capturing. The way I'll show this is just with a microphone, and I'm just going to snap my fingers, and you can see every time this plus LED is yellow, this is indicating that it's armed. You can see it can actually be quite responsive. The hold parameter is quite critical. So this defines a period of time where the ONSET analysis is going to ignore any inputs. So it's like the hold parameter on a noise gate, and it means that only after the hold time duration has elapsed, then the plus sign will relight, and that's it rearmed. There we go. So it means that you've got a lot of control over how busy you want your source audio is, and how much you want it to trigger. So what I'm going to do for these examples is I'm going to keep spray about here, and I'm just going to snap my fingers to start it capturing, and then whistle tones and have that layer in to the buffer. So I'll clear this first. I'm going to have dub. I'll keep it at 12 o'clock just now, so it's going to be doing sound on sound. I'll turn the microphone up a bit, and what I've actually got is a pair of speakers in the room that I can turn up level 2 from the headphone output. And the plan for this is that I want there to be a bit of ambient audio that is capturing up and layering on top, so a degree of feedback. And what I'm going to show with that is I've got the pitch deviation all the way up at full clockwise. So this is adding octave up, octave down pitch offsets for certain grains. So if those grains are sounding at an octave up, playing through the speakers, being captured in as part of the layer, that's going to be pitched up again. So we're going to get this sort of like building up, not quite barber tones, because it's all, I guess technically barber tones, but because it's all octaves, it's going to be just a spread sort of octave unison harmonization. So we'll see how this sounds. quite a fun way of using it. I'll do. I'm going to clear this, and let's go with just for an example of ONSET analysis. I'm going to come from the ARA, and let's just send a sawtooth wave through that as a sound source. Got my speaker, so I'm not got any room noise cycling. Okay, so if I now bring up my onset detection, I'll bring hold down a little bit. I brought that up a bit gradually so it didn't actually trigger the onset capturing. Now if I sort of whip the filter, that was enough of an impulse to cause it to start capturing. So that's a trick I can use as well, particularly with the ARA, where it's got a strike input built in, so I can ping an envelope, and that's opening up the filter quite abruptly. So what I could even do is use volt per octave to control the pitch, and use the gate output from my harmony to strike it. So every time I play a new note, that's going to be triggering capture, so I'm going to get elongation of each individual note as I play it. So increase the decay time a bit. So this is kind of using the onset detection in more of a synthesis type context. Cool. I'll be coming back to ONSET again in a topic to come, because this is just the default behavior for how the ONSET analysis is applied on the arbor. So more to come. Okay, so I've built up quite a nice collection of sound sources across the first 5 layers here. So most of them tonal, that's just sawtooth waves. This was the ONSET triggered filtered sawtooth. There's our bonfire, the scratches and wind noise, and then the original CSL wavefolder voice. So far I've shown, I've kind of like kept constrained to a single layer when sort of working in capturing audio. As you can hear now, audio can be pulled from any layer at any time. So as I'm just scrubbing through, I've got quite long grain, so it's basically building up this full level of polyphony through everything. So let's say I want to automate that, then let's go with a random voltage signal. I'm going to go amplitude, let's go unipolar positive. So this should be a random 0 to 5 volt signal. There we go. 4, 6, yeah, 6 volts. So if I patch this to my layer CV, I'm now grabbing grains randomly from across the 6 layers. I'm hitting the last one, the zeta layer, occasionally, but I don't currently have any. I don't think I do, at least. yeah, there's no current audio in zeta, so it's all just in the rest of it. So let's say I want to keep this as my main curated sound bed of audio, and I want to start capturing additional stuff into the mix. But so far I've been in a single layer at a time and been capturing, and that's been curated, and that's been recording into that particular layer. The way that capturing happens, because you can be playing from lots of layers polyphonically, you can only be recording to one at a time. So if I hit capture, whatever layer it happens to have been in at the time that I engage capturing, it's going to be capturing into that layer, which I don't necessarily want, because, you know, I might have dubbed up or down, so there's a risk that I might be overdubbing or removing audio that I want to retain. So there's a trick for this. If I, let's keep this on patch just now, just for visibility. If I hold shift and then turn the layer pot, you can see that's broken this yellow and white LED pair apart. So the yellow LED indicates the record layer. So what I did there, I started in alpha and held shift, decoupled the record layer. I'm now pointing over here, so I'm now pointing towards the zeta layer, but it didn't actually move out of the sounding layer. So that's by design, so that this actually needs a pickup. I need to move it back to alpha to then pick up and move again. So it keeps it very secure from, if I'm, say I want to be hearing the delta layer here, and I want to change my record destination to beta, I'm not immediately going to jump to hearing the sounds from beta, because that might be audio that I don't necessarily want. So it's very well thought out in terms of keeping a lot of control. So okay, let's re-engage this back to zeta. That means I can be moving and pulling playback source from any of these layers, but if I hit record, I'm only ever going to be recording to this zeta layer here. So levels all the way down, so it means that I can start playing in, I'll start just whistling tones in and just use the microphone for this. This is all happening while hearing playback from all the other layers. Actually, to do that, I'll add the random CV back in. Now if I pull out the CV, I could go straight to my zeta layer. And we're hearing only that new audio that I've captured in through the microphone. So that's for controlled recording. You can lock it to a layer. If you want to recouple it so that your record and playback selection are paired together again, you simply hold shift and you want to move through to the omega layer, and that's going to repair them. So you can see now the pairings locked together with CV. So show that once more. This is them naturally paired together. Unpair them by holding shift and turning. So I now have delta defined as my record layer. To recouple, hold shift and turn it to omega, and that recouples them again. Okay, so that leads us to the omega position of this pot as well. This is a cool feature. It's a bit specific, because like what's quite nice with what I've been doing so far is as I change through layers, it's literally doing it as layers. So I've got, like, you know, the alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, and the playhead's common for them all. So if I have scan all the way down, keep spray all the way down. Then I'm at the start of the alpha layer. The position per layer is staying constant, so I'm kind of scanning through like the position of all of them together. If I bring up spray all the way, then that's pulling from any position in any of the layers at once. And now, if I go to Omega, this is essentially chaining each layer tail to head. So this is now controlled entirely from the scan pot. So as I sweep the scan position, it's going through all 13 seconds, all 13 seconds, all 13 seconds, all 13 seconds. Which it's a different way of navigating through the whole collection. So if I go back to random CV, I'll patch that to scan now. This is pulling random locations across all 6 layers. So we've essentially randomized that common scan position, which is now could be anywhere across any of the layers. Yeah, we need to have a slightly higher peak-to-peak amplitude. Let's go with a slower LFO. There we go. So the CV is bipolar around the center position of the scan pot. So that's peak to peak hitting, like going through all 6 layers together. Okay, we're nearly there. Just a few more key parameters to cover. Yeah, I'm going to come back to the onset detection now, or I guess the onset detection and the pulse output, because they kind of have a pairing with this next feature set. So this is something that is expanded upon since the V1 firmware, so a few more details added in. I'm going to be looking through the new quick start guide for V2. If we go to the center page section, this is a page that lists the now 6 different options for onset analysis and the pulse output settings. So onset detection, as we saw in the previous example, that's pluses lit yellow, that's going to auto start capturing when armed. The pulse output, we can see it's generating trigger signals. So if I quickly patch that up here, you can see that's generating triggers coinciding with the grains. So every new grain that fires, it generates a trigger signal. So this can get quite rapid, especially if we go to shorter length, higher intensity. It can be quite an interesting clock source for stochastic timing or regular timing if you're going lower intensity. Cool. So there are now 6 different options for how these mechanics are configured. The default for preset 1 is that trigger output and onset analysis controlling capture. If I press and hold shift and capture together, I now have this selection of 6 different modes for this. So the default one for preset 1 is alpha. If I move to beta, you can see we no longer have trigger outputs coming from this jack. But if I arm sensing, there we go. So what we can see is every time it starts capturing, only when triggered from the onset, it produces a gate signal from the output. So this is a way that you can pair your onset analysis to, which is controlling the capturing, but you can also patch that out and use that as a control source within a bigger patch, which can be pretty cool. Okay, let's go up to gamma. So here we can see the plus is turned white. So this is an indicator that it's now decoupled from capturing. So if I bring this up, it's no longer going to be there. It's no longer going to be triggering capture, but I do have triggers coming out per grain. So I've now got this combination of grain generated triggers. If I bring intensity all the way down, you can see it's generating a trigger every time onset detection occurs. What I can do just for reference is I'll use this knock as a visualizer. There we go. So every time I re-trigger the onset detection, it's generating a trigger output. So it's trigger versus a gate in this case. Let's move to delta. So again, we're white. You can see now the envelope's changed dramatically. So this is now actually generating a gate signal when onset's been triggered, but before it rearms itself. So this can be quite useful for generating longer gate signals defined by the hold parameter. But again, it being white, it's completely decoupled from capturing. So this is a way that we can break out the onset detection, onset analysis feature on its own and use that just as a mechanic as part of a patch, independent of the Arbhar's main granular functionality. Yeah, pretty cool. The last two, which are new, so V1 had the same alpha through delta. Epsilon is new. You can see again it's white. So that means it's decoupled from our capture control, and I'm now getting a trigger every time I manually strike a grain. So this is again another way that you can more performatively be controlling grains, but using that as a manual trigger source for envelopes, for instance. There we go. So the last onset analysis mode is Zeta. So this is again one of the new ones with V2. This one's a bit different. So this is quite specifically designed for the Arbhar's follow mode, which what I'll do, I'll just engage follow mode, which is shift capture and then tapping the scan pot to its extremes. You can see it's toggling on and off the white strike LED button. So if it's off, follow mode is disengaged. If it's on, follow mode is engaged. So here we have scan defining speed of the follow mode. So hold defines the length of the loop, and scan defines the playback speed. So in the Zeta onset mode, onset detection is essentially disabled. It's not doing anything. It's decoupled from capture, but the trigger output is generating an end of cycle trigger. So this is quite a specific use case, but it made sense having it added into this menu selection, even though it's only relevant to follow mode. So yeah, that's the onset analysis and pulse output modes. Okay, parameter track and hold. This is quite a very useful performative feature. What you do is you double tap shift, which puts the display into this green display. What this is doing is now ignoring every parameter until I release it. So essentially hold and track, arguably. So at the moment we've been hearing it on the alpha layer. I had the scan down at the first note, medium intensity. So I'm going to completely change this to being sawtooth windowing, quite a long length, lower intensity, no pitch deviation, spray all the way down, and I'll set it to the last note in my, or the late stages of my scan of the buffer. So this is that minor pentatonic, so this should land on the higher note. There we go. So it's a way of ignoring all the parameters while you redefine them, and then releasing and like updating all at once. There we go. So there is one new quirk with this track and hold feature, and that is the pitch control under it. So if I double tap and hold shift, I'm now holding all parameters. If I adjust the pitch control, we'll see that we're getting this indication on the layer LEDs. This is actually giving us precision over semitone offsets. So in the center, this is omega, that's my original pitch. If I go up till I land on omega again, there we go, that's me up exactly 1 octave. Or up 2 octaves. Or if I want to go perfect fifth, then it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 semitones. So it's a way of getting really precise pitch offsets in the track and hold behavior. Okay, now we're at the last section. Last bit, I'm going to look at the mod CV input for preset 1. So this is the presets themselves. They're a re-implementation of how we previously had the 4 modes on the arbor. So the 4 modes were we had reverb, we had panning, we had delay mode, and the fourth was the mod CV was mapped to the hold parameter, because that's the only one that is missing its own dedicated CV. All parameters have got a CV input between the module and the expander, so hold being the odd one out. So there was a mode for mod CV to apply to hold. The default for preset 1 for the Arbor Classic one is reverb. So it's the classic reverb behavior over the mod CV. So what I'll do, I'm going to add in random CV over layers and just create this nice carnage across all these different layers. And for CV source, I've got a Vinca here, which I've got set to cascade in series. So I've now got a full bipolar offset voltage from the top, and then that I can attenuate down to suit with the fader. So I'm going to send this to mod CV. So here's the Arbor's classic reverb capability, which is a bipolar control. So this is unchanged from V1. So if I have 0 volts going in, no reverb's applied. Actually, what I'll do, I'll stop that for the time being. I'll go to there we go. So I've got a manual strike over some grains. I'll jump this up an octave actually. And get octaves from there. Cool. Okay, so here we're going to positive 5 volts. If I reach the right threshold, I land on a freezing reverb. So really nice for sustained reverb throws. If I go negative though, this is a freezing reverb that's slightly different in character, but it's yeah, there's a bit of modulation built in there, so it kind of distributes and diffuses a bit more. And it's also completely missing the dry signal, so if you go negative you just get only the wet reverb. Yeah, really nice range of controls over a single CV source. So if we go, let's use this random CV from sample and hold. Random CV over different amounts of reverb throw between positive and negative. I'll add random CV into layer as well. Just adds another layer of ambience and space to the whole result. Yeah, mod CV. Okay, so that is preset 1 covered. Okay, now we're on to preset number 2. But before we dive into the specifics of the preset itself, I figured it makes sense to show the interface and mechanics for changing between presets, so how to change different scenes. So the term scene, that's what we've settled on for the arbhar. So loading or saving a scene. A scene comprises, scene's comprised of 6 audio files, so that's 1 per layer. So you can basically save all your audio content of all the buffers at once to a scene, which will also bundle it with a preset file, so a custom preset of the configuration of all the parameters. Yeah, it gets complicated because there's a mechanic for saving, for loading only audio, or loading only preset configurations, or loading both. This I'm going to do in a separate video. Like, this is going to be a deeper dive feature. So in this video I just need to cover the core mechanics of the factory presets as the goal. But it does mean explaining the menu a little bit. So to enter the scenes menu, button combination is Shift, Capture and Tap Strike, which brings us to this landing page here. So if we look at the second to last page in the quick start guide, this gives us a breakdown of what colors or what pages are, what they mean. So we can see we've got these 3 prominent white lights. The leftmost one is pulsing in width a little bit, so that's indicating we're on page 1. The big buttons, they cycle through left and right, and it just round robins through the 3 pages. So page 1, page 2, page 3, and the white light will pulse to indicate which one you're on. Each one's also got its own unique color scheme, which we figured this just adds a bit more immediate recognition of it once you're a bit more familiar with the interface. So page 1 is this magenta and purple, 2 is yellow and red, 3 is sort of orange and green. As I say, I'm going to leave this for another video, the depths of what the menu is, but ultimately this is clone and library access for loading individual samples. Page 2 is for loading scenes, so this is the way that we load presets, and page 3 is for saving scenes or saving presets. So we're looking at page 2 in this instance for loading presets, and the preset selection is made by the layer pot here. So you can see as I turn it round, we're going through alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta. So that's the 6 6 presets. Omega's staying white here, and we're only getting 1 rotation round the LED ring, all lit white. So this is specific to this instance because I don't have a USB drive connected at the moment. So these 6 scenes these are the onboard slots. So these are the factory default presets in these 6 onboard memory locations. If I enter this page when I've got a USB drive connected that's got the appropriate folder structure and stuff there, it actually opens up from being just 6 available slots for scenes up to 42, because it's going to add an additional 36. I'll quickly show that just for reference. So that's me back to just normal Armor visuals. I don't think I mentioned that. So to exit the menu, it's the same button combination, just Shift, Capture, Strike, and that takes you back out. So I'm going to put the USB drive in first, and I'll give it a second, and then that way it's making sure it's recognizing the drive. I'm now going to re-enter the scenes menu. I'm on page 2 still, so this is for loading scenes, and I'm going to adjust the layer pot, the layer control. So you can see I've not turned it anywhere near as much, and I'm getting this first cycle of the first 6 scenes that are all white. So that's the first 6 factory presets. If I move it further, we're now counting up through 6 pages of 6 scenes. So that's the added 36. So we can see in yellow that's counting up the page. So page 1 is alpha lit yellow, page 2 is beta, gamma, delta, and we get a count through 6 within 6. It's a bit. There's a lot going on, but it adds a lot of capability within the Arbor. So I'll exit the scene menu once more, pull the drive, and go back in. So this is how it's going to look if you're running just the Arbor with no USB expansion, no external things. So this is it running kind of as vanilla as it can be. So here I want to load my second preset. So I'm going to select beta, and then I double tap Shift. And that's going to start loading. There we go. So what you'll notice is this has retained the audio that I had previously. This is something to bear in mind. The 6 factory presets, if they are as they are out of the box, a fresh initialized Arbor, they're designed so that they will not replace the audio. So if you've got audio in it, you can change to a different preset, which will give you a different functionality of the Arbor, but it's not going to remove your audio. There is a situation where that can be different. These 6 local memory slots, you can save to them in the same way that you would save scenes to the USB drive, and that can be set up so that you're saving audio as well as a unique configuration, in which case if you load that, it will load the audio as well as the preset parameters. So yes, that's something to bear in mind. Unless you know for sure what your configuration is of scenes, and if you're using the default 6 presets there, or if you're using those as memory locations, then if you want to get things back to foundation factory reset, it's the Shift, Capture, and spamming Strike to reset that, and that will clear the 6 local memory locations. Cool. I think that covers it. Okay, we're in preset 2, which is delay mode. So this is a feature that's a remnant from V1, where version 1 of the Arbor, it had 4 modes that were accessed from the little slide switches on the back. So that was reverb mode, delay mode, panning, and mode CV applied to the hold parameter. So those are the 4 sort of operating modes. We no longer need to access the slide switches on the back for changing these. They're all front access via the scenes menu, as they're included in the 6 factory presets now. So delay mode is really unchanged. It's the same as it's been in V1. Mod CV applies variation to the delay time, to the built-in delay. So it's a quite simplistic but really nice and quite musical implementation. Really suits like applying whips and like reverb, not reverb throws, like delay sort of throws. So like the reverb mode, it's bipolar CV control. So positive CV I've got here, going from the center of this attenuverter or this bias to positive. It's affecting the delay time. And if I go negative, it's doing the same thing, but it's a different scale of delay time. So this is getting more into like resonator, car plus strong type effects. So one thing you're probably noting if you're listening on headphones or on stereo speakers is the delay is only applied to the right side. So this is done because it's effectively like a dual mono type effect where I've got this patched in stereo where left is my top output, right is my bottom output, and we're only hearing the delay on one side. So this is applying the delay to only the grains coming from the lower output. So if I unpatch, actually what I'll do, I'll remove this side so that we have the create dual mono. So here we're hearing the delay applied. If I patch from the lower output only, we should hear the delay just slightly more prominent. So what's happening here is the delay is only applied to audio from, or grains going to this output alone. So if I patch from the top output only, it's getting an analog sum of this output. So we're getting all grains, but only half the grains, only the grains coming from the lower output have the delay effect applied to them. So if I patch a dummy cable in here, we're hearing only the dry grains coming from the top output. So patch that back in stereo. So we're only hearing the delay on one side. So again, if I go like this. So this is negative CV, and we get up to that sort of sustained feedback resonator effect down to more subtle shimmery resonances. To more typical whipping delays. So let's try adding just random steps, bipolar CV to this. Now I'll just play through different layers. Quite a nice additional effect. It's maybe still a bit sparse because we're cutting half the grains. If I go from the top output, we're getting all grains, but only some of them have the delay effect applied to them. Delay mode. Okay, next we're into preset number 3, which is the Arbhar's kind of dedicated optimized stereo preset. Because with the V2 firmware, the whole granular engine can now do true stereo. So you can record in stereo, and the grain playback itself, when it fires a grain, it's a true stereo grain with discrete left-right content. Before I dive into the actual presets feature set, I figured it makes sense to revisit the scenes menu and talk about page 1, which is the layer, clone and load page. So the purpose of this page is to duplicate audio that's in a particular layer to another one, which is a really useful way of working, especially if you know, so say here I've got my minor pentatonic layer. I want to work it further. I want to capture stuff in and dub it on top, modify it a bit. I only have one layer of undo, which is useful, but very quickly you might lose stuff that you want to retain. The best way to make sure you're keeping backwards compatibility of your content is to save your entire scene. So like back up all your audio to a USB drive if you're working on stuff that is non-volatile compositionally. Essentially, if you're working more quick, just sketching, then this is a really quick and easy way to work something, try something out, but then revert back to the content itself. So reference, I've got scratchy sounds on beta, gamma's kind of that synthetic flame sound. I've got sawtooths, and I've got whistles on zeta. So let's target beta and zeta as backup locations. So I want to rework the content I've got in alpha, so I'm going to clone that to beta and clone that to zeta so that I can then go back to this clean and unaffected. So the way to do this is in page 1 of the scenes menu. So the thing to bear in mind when you're cloning is you're cloning the content of the layer that you're in when you enter the menu. So at the moment I'm in alpha, everything's blue. If I enter the menu, I now have a selection of the 6 buffers that are target locations for cloning to. So what I'll do, I'm going to select beta, double tap shift. That is cloning the content in. It's done it. It did the little squiggly line thing. You'll notice that it's not automatically exited the menu like it does when you save or load a scene. This is because you might want to clone to more than one destination, which in this case I do. So I'm going to move over to zeta, double tap shift. There we go, I've also cloned there. So if I now exit the menu, alpha sounds as expected. If I go to beta, that's now got the same audio content that I had before. Delta's gamma's unchanged, delta's unchanged, epsilon's unchanged, and zeta's now got my source material as well. So yeah, a really useful way of just moving content somewhere else so you can then go back to it, or you could copy it back to alpha if you need later on. Cool, so that is cloning layers. On that same page is also the load library option. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to use this drive. So this is currently loaded with the sample library that ships with the expansion pack currently. It'll eventually be online to download. Some really creative stuff that's gone into this library. So I've picked out a sample that I want to target and load, and I'll show you the way that this is done. So put the drive in, give it a sec just to make sure it's picked up the USB drive. I'm going to enter the menu. Again, I'm going to enter from alpha. So in this case, I'm not going to clone audio from this, but I'm in the destination that I want to load to. So this is all done from the same page, where the first clone locations are when omega is white and I'm selecting the first ring of LEDs in white. So this is for copying the content that's actively playing from the current layer to another one. If I push past that, I now turn omega yellow, and this is now giving me 6 pages of 6 slots, and each slot is a sample if it's populated on the USB drive. So let's go with page 1.1. So that's alpha's lit yellow, omega's yellow, and alpha's also lit white. So this is page 1, sample 1 of the library. I'm going to press and hold shift, and that's giving me a preview. So what it does here, it loads the first 3 seconds of the sample into RAM, so it can just give you a preview play. So what I've done, I've curated a particular library folder in this instance so that I can load individual samples, because there are more samples than you can access in this library. So basically there are multiple sample library folders that you rename in the folder structure on the USB drive, and you can access them. So there's 36 samples that can be accessed on the fly, and these can be your own curated library as well. So you can just dump audio files onto the USB drive. They don't need to be cropped down to the 13-second maximum. It will automatically just cut the first 13 seconds and load that into the layer. So I'm going to look for page 6 sample 2. So bring this up, so I'm on page 6 and go alpha beta. So this should be one of the sort of choral samples. So this is a combination of Jimmy and Tash singing a nice big chord voicing. I'll preview it. There we go. So this is a nice stereo sample. So I thought this could be a good way of showing, you know, a bit of stereo stuff, which I'll do in the next section. So let's load this. There we go. Bring the pitch shifting off. There we go. So that is loading a sample, and we can see if I change through my different layers. Beta is what my original alpha was, as is zeta, and gamma, delta, and epsilon are unchanged. Okay, let's get on with stereo examples. Let's get into preset 3, which is our optimized stereo preset. I'm going to load this up. I'm going to go to the page 2 for scene load, and I'm going to load preset 3. Here we go. So something immediately of note here, the plus LED has gone white, so this has changed the ONSET input from being ONSET detection to being our second channel input. I'm going to clear this buffer just now, and what I'm going to use as an example is just a basic stereo voice that I'm going to create from the CSL. So I'm going to have one tone coming in as there we go, need to go to dry. So we have this patched as left and right. I'm going into the ONSET input, which electrically it's the same thing as before, microphone normals to ONSET, ONSET normals to input. So if I patch here, I'm going mono to dual mono. So if I turn this up, that's me turning up what's going to the left channel. If I turn up the sense input, that's turning up what's going to the right channel. So these become my stereo input sources. There are some quirks going on here. So something to keep in mind is that the top input level, that is that's going through the analog, essentially preamp stage. That's as I said, the same circuitry that's designed in the looper. The ONSET input was originally never heard, so it was always just an input that you never hear directly. So it doesn't have the same circuitry on the input. It's a more simplistic, just buffer stage going into the codec channel. So to get a degree of consistency between left and right, what Sebastian's done is built in an analog model of the input analog gain stage. So the way to maximize this for the best balance is 12 o'clock and 12 o'clock for both these inputs. That kind of gives you a essentially a calibrated input balance. So you can use this. It means that if you're using a stereo source, if you need to gain stage it, you might need to use a stereo VCA or some sort of stereo amplitude control before it gets to the arbor itself. But this way we've got a nice balanced matched stereo input. So to create a stereo source, I'm going to come out of top oscillator of the CSL and patch it in here. And this is currently tuned to a major third interval. So I've got my root on the right and major third on the left. And I'm just going to capture this in to this layer. There we go. I'll just fill the full buffer and go full wet. So this is now granular, stereo granular playback of this stereo source. So the stereo source being extreme hard left, hard right, root third, major dyad. So the thing that's interesting to consider here, where we're playing back in true stereo, so what I'll do, I'll show the output section page in the quick start guide, which has got a graphic that depicts the difference between mono to dual output stereo grains versus stereo grains, which are derived in parallel. So what's counterintuitive that we found quite early on in early testing of the stereo implementation on the arbor is that mono to stereo implementation sounds, mono implementation essentially, where you're branching out as dual mono patched hard left, hard right, that actually sounds more stereo than when you're working in stereo mode with stereo grains. I think the factor is that the discrete left right, that's giving you extreme hard panned audio distribution, whereas the stereo grains, single grain fires and it's got left and right content that is paired left and right. So it'll only sound as stereo as your source audio is, which is somewhat counterintuitive, but yeah, it's an interesting discovery like that. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to bring my intensity down and just manually strike grains, and what we're going to notice is so this is just enveloped impulses from our source audio, which is root third, right left. So here, when I'm striking grains individually, we're getting a flip-flop between the left and right channels. So this is a built-in coin toss logic where it's changing, it's swapping up at random per grain. This will probably be most noticeably heard if I patch out from here. There we are. So this is just listening to one channel as dual mono, and we're hearing the hard swap between left and right. So again, this will depend entirely on your source audio. So a lot of stereo voices might be drum voice. So if it's like acoustic drum samples where it was an XY microphone pair, that's going to have a distribution of it, but it's going to be quite subtle. Like when you're just summing to mono or just like isolating one over the other, it might not be the most prominently noticeable change in stereo field versus this, which is specifically split between two notes. So this is kind of a misuse of stereo recording where I'm breaking out to just one channel and just like randomly oscillating between the left and right channels, but then being discrete individual notes, I've got a way of it's not how the stereo mode has been intended to use, but it's a really musical result. Let's patch this back in to make it truly stereo. There we go. So things are spread out a bit more. So we're getting that flip-flop between the two chord tones, but we're also getting octave jumps from the pitch deviation. go with a slow random voltage source. Patch that to the harmony and just give myself a I guess a key detail of the preset 3, the stereo preset, is the mod CV. We've kept that as a default to the reverb effect. Performatively, that's kind of, you know, the one that I tend to gravitate towards, so it kind of made sense just to keep it as is. Yeah, I've gone through many ideas for how to demonstrate this patch. I think this is kind of the clearest, most, in a nutshell, I've got a stereo source, it's just hard panned chord tones, and that kind of gives the, you know, as extreme an example as it can be, but yeah, the Arbhar now full true stereo, where you can capture in stereo files and be granularizing in stereo. Okay, next up we're on to preset 4, which is follow mode, which is an interesting one, because follow mode's a feature that was pre-existing. It was already in Arbhar V2 firmware, and it's something that can be accessed on the fly. So before I go into the actual preset, I can engage follow mode here. Let's go to a buffer that's got discrete content across the range of it. Bring scan down. So to enter, to engage follow mode, it's shift capture and then tapping the scan pot to the extremes, and that will toggle on, off, on, off. You'll see it's on when the strike button's lit. So what this does is allows you to automate the movement . Allows you to automate the movement of the scan of the playhead. So a couple of parameters here. Hold defines the loop length that it's cycling through, and scan pot defines speed. So this is an addition from version 1. Is the scan pot is now an attenuverter type control. So if I bring it to the center, that's installed. If I go in reverse, that is going to sweep in reverse. Yeah, I believe in the config file, or the preset files, you can actually define this, whether you want it to be unipolar control or this bipolar control. But by default, we've gone with this bidirectional option. Okay, so why does this warrant having some preset? This is where things get pretty cool. There's some extra quirks that we came across when we were early stage testing with the new follow mode features. So I'm going to load, this is me in load page, and I'm going to load preset 4, which is beta, gamma, delta, double tap. And this is me loading the actual factory preset for number 4. Okay, so we can see we're already in follow mode. It's bidirectional. A thing to note here is that the trigger output, it has a particular behavior going on. There we go. So you can see it's generating an end of cycle trigger. So this is epsilon for onset mode. Zeta for the onset mode. So this is the one where it is end of cycle trigger when in follow mode. So this is pre-configured for this particular preset, and there's a good reason for this. Let me patch up a voice here. I'm going to send CSL voice into my input. go to dry only, bring this up. So here's an additional quirk that is probably worth covering at this point. Depending on how you're listening to this video, if you're on headphones, you'll hear this wave folder coming through, but it's going to be, it might sound like it's coming from inside your head. So it's we've got a phase inversion here. So this is because the default of the preset is kind of configured for mono patching, where I would use just mono output to create a single mono signal with all the grains flattened to one output. So this is taking a mono sum of the lower output summed in with the top. If I patch this discretely into stereo, the setup here, because we're no longer doing the analog summing, we've essentially lost an inversion stage. So there's now a phase inversion between the left and right because it's been patched in stereo from a mono configuration. So to compensate for that, I engage the phase switch. So that's we have the lookup table that details the button combination. This is unchanged from V1 as well. So shift capture and tapping hold to the right, that's going to engage or disengage, whichever way it was. It's now the opposite, and that's brought everything in alignment for that mono source. Grains are still going to be hard distributed left and right on this. So let's start capturing something in. Dub down. Okay, let's redo that. So dub's all the way down, so I'm now replacing the content of the buffer. And you can hear that's now just playing back through that section. So this is where things get interesting. I'm going to self-patch the arbor. I'm going to use that end of cycle trigger and patch that into the capture input. Now you can see that's causing the capture to blip. What's happening here is anytime it receives a trigger, it's going to reset the record head back to the origin. And because it's never timing out at the end of the layer completely, it's now constantly recording into itself. So this is where we actually gain the ability to define the arbor's behavior as a ring buffer, which is new because it's quite counter to the core mechanics of it. So here I'm going to bring my hold down so I have a shorter loop and set the speed so that I'm getting it to follow approximately the same speed, maybe just lagging slightly behind. I'll go to mix between dry and wet, make sure I've got plenty of grains, and I'm going to bring up spray slightly. So here's another thing of note. In follow mode, introducing spray is going to be spraying behind the playhead, so that's flipped from standard operation. So now this is essentially turned the arbor into a fully functional granular delay, where the delay time is a component of hold, so length of the loop, which is also a factor of scan for the rate of following. I'll reintroduce spray, so I'm getting play a bit with the grain window. Let's go, I'll keep it bidirectional. I'm going to go more higher intensity, slightly shorter length. So we're getting these sort of like granular echoes. Okay, Okay, what I'm going to do next is bring up my dub level. So this is send on sound. So this is the same as essentially adding feedback to a delay, because it's going to keep printing over the top of itself, but the old stuff's going to get compounded. So now, slow down the grain count, reduce the intensity, let's increase the length. Yeah, this is a really fun patch to play with. Really atmospheric using this. This is just a single manually controlled timbral oscillator. And as I described with in the stereo preset, this being a mono patch ultimately, it's mono in to stereo or hard left, hard right grain playback, but the stereo spread is much more prominent. Even though it's a basic mono source. What I'll add next is a bit of random voltage to go to mod CV. To increase the amplitude a bit. So what mod CV does in this context, it's maybe quite hard to demonstrate actually. It's essentially maps to hold, which is defining the loop length. So you can use this as a means of automating and controlling the overall delay time of how long, how macro or micro it is in looping. Yeah, so that's follow mode, which is granular delay ring buffer mode. Really fun one. Okay, next up preset 5, which is our panning mode. So this is another rollover from V1, where mod CV could be applied to panning control. So this is now positioned in position 5 of the presets. So it's actually much the same as it was in V1, but I'll go through a bit of an example for it. So let's load this. I'm in page 2 of the scenes menu, and I'm looking for epsilon 5. I'm going to load this. So what it does is mod CV is controlled to control the panning distribution of the grains between hard left, hard right. So what I'll do, I'll patch up. This is what I'll do. I'm going to patch up through the scope. Have that set in XY so that I can see a clearer example of where grains are landing. Yeah, so we're getting occasional ones where it's landing. Okay, so this is just individual grains at a time, and it's randomly flipping between right and left. hard right, hard left on our output. Let me just get a new source in. I'm going to put in. I'll capture this in and just get a nice clean sweep from the wave folder through the layer. Clean enough sweep, that'll do. Okay, and now let's go back to here. I've got long grains, low intensity, so it's hard left, hard right. As I let's bring up, let's reduce the length. So we're getting aggressive overlap. There we go. So we're getting clear definition between left and right. So now I've got CV from this Vinca patched to my mod CV. At the moment the grain distribution is hard left, hard right. As I go through to positive CV into mod, it's reducing the stereo spread or distribution of it. So it means that if I have a little bit of positive CV, we're not on hard axis of vertical or horizontal on the XY. It's brought in a bit, so we're basically bringing in the stereo width of these two all the way to complete mono. If I go negative, because it's a bipolar CV, does it a little bit differently, where every time it fires a grain, it's a distribution of equal power panning between it. So this is technically a more true stereo distribution of it, where it's placed across the phantom image between left and right. So that's why every grain we're firing, we're getting a different angle on the XY. Yeah, I think I'll keep it as that, because that's a sort of, in a nutshell, giving an example of what this preset's doing. There are lots of really musical uses of the Arbhar's new stereo capabilities. I'm going to save that for a separate video, because it's a bit of a deep dive. So if you have access to the sample library, it's got a collection of samples throughout it that have the it looks like the half diminished sign, so circle with a dash through it. So that's what Jimmy's used to signify it's a mid-side encoded sample, which is really interesting in context, because it gives us some extra quirks in terms of how the samples are played back, where if you're using this panning mode to reduce the stereo width, when there's mid-side encoding, it means that you can get a cancellation of one channel but not the other. So some of the choral samples, some of the guitar samples, they've got a means of utilizing stereo in addition to this panning CV type mode to have an additional control where you're muting one voice of the sample that's encoded in. Yeah, it's a really interesting implementation, so I'll save that for a dedicated video. So this takes us to our sixth and final preset of the factory presets. This one's a little bit interesting. Arguably, it didn't necessarily need to be a preset in itself, but we've used this as a means of highlighting a brand new feature, which is brand new to the version 2 firmware, and that is Accumulative Recording mode, which is pretty significant, I think. It's a mode that can be turned on the fly at any time in any preset, but we thought having it as the 6th preset and having it just load with it engaged already, it was quite a good way to just introduce it in context. So let me load the preset first, and we'll see what the interface looks like. So I'm on page 2, go over to the zeta position, load that. So Accumulative Recording, it allows for audio to be captured accumulatively. So traditionally the arbhar would capture from the beginning, and it would scroll through the full buffer and always reset to the beginning each time. The accumulative recording mode allows you to stop-start the record head. So if I start recording, it's going to fill in a bit, stop it, it's going to hold that position and then pick up where it left off when you hit capture again. So I'm going to, let's go down to our alpha layer here, clear that. I'll take spray and length down just so that we're visually seeing a sort of blank slate. So already, you can see as I engaged this, preloaded this preset, the capture button is pulsing. So this is the indicator to show that it's in accumulative recording mode. And yeah, let's see what it looks like when I actually start capturing stuff in. I'm going to hit the button, it's going to start recording as normal. I'll then stop it when it gets to maybe about that angle. So just past the gamma LED. And recording, and stop. Recording, and stop. Microphone's up, so it's picking up my voice. Okay, so I stopped it about there. If I hit capture again, it's going to pick up recording and carry on from where I left off. So I'll just whistle a tone and capture something else in. That's completely different from spoken word from before. And likewise, could do it with another tone. And this can happen in rapid succession. I can just keep spamming the button and just capture in chunks of audio as I go. Cool, so I've stopped it about there, just towards the end. So the arbhar does, the arbhar gives access to scan through 10 seconds of audio, but the buffer itself records that extra grain's worth at the end. There is a mechanism in accumulative recording mode that I'll explain that does make sense as to why it does this. So I've stopped about there. I'm going to let it record, and I'm going to let the record head essentially go off screen into that last 3 second duration. So here we go, and 1, 2. So that's me paused it, maybe about 1.5 seconds or so off screen. As soon as I hit capture again, if it's been paused in that off-screen position, it will automatically restart back to the start of the buffer. The reason for this is if it were to capture and fill in that remaining gap right at the end, there's no way for me to access that new audio directly. I would need to have scan at the 10-second mark and then turn my grains up to full 3 seconds long to capture that audio. So here it's at the end, and it's captured a little bit of, the button click or just some acoustic noise while doing that. So if I hit capture, it should just start picking up from the beginning. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so let's use this in an actual context. I'm going to clear the buffer here. There are a few extra key commands that are very useful in this mode as well. So I can see there's already a certain location of the record head at the moment. So if I want to clear this and get this back to the start, I could let it record and just run out time until it gets past that 10-second point, and then it will let me start again from the beginning. But if I want to force that, then I can actually just double tap shift so I get to the track and hold control page. So this is where I can change various parameters, and it will only update to those positions upon releasing. But if I'm in that mode, if I tap the record button, that jumps the record head back to the start. So here we are, start position. It's carrying on, it's picking up granular stuff. It's picking up audio to granularize. Double tap shift, tap capture, and we're back at the beginning. So I can redo that if I need. Cool. Okay, so let me bounce that back to the start, and let's capture in let's create a collage just in a single layer, as opposed to having to capture audio into one buffer, into another buffer, into another buffer, into another buffer. I can, if it's just shorter snippets of audio, I can condense that down to a single layer. So let's start with just microphone scratches. Yeah, that's cool. Let's put some tones in. So I'm patching from the CSL here. So what I'll do, I'll patch this in stereo just so we're hearing a bit more spread of our grains. Okay, so one thing to note of here is, because this was originally running in mono, if I'm patching in stereo, I've now got a phase inversion between the two channels of my raw signal coming through. So I want to engage the phase switch, which is here on the back lookup table here. So that is shift capture and hold. Tapping hold to the rightmost position. So that's engaged a phase inversion, so I've now got phase alignment of my dry signal coming through. Yeah, so that's unchanged from V1. That's something that you kind of just need to balance and figure out where the phase needs to be depending on the patching context. Okay, so let's go with we'll start capturing and just do like a pull down of the wave folder. There we go, let's go back to full wave. Yeah, that's worked quite nicely. Okay, let's do something very different. I'm going to go multiply, and let's go full circular FM. I'll capture just a bit of that noise out. Quite a range of different timbres in one layer now. Okay, let's go to something very different. I'll patch in from the looper here.
It's the ninja.
Okay, so I think that is Matthew and Jimmy playing table tennis upstairs. Not live, played back from a sample, of course. So let's capture in a bit of this.
It's the ninja.
Okay, that's a bit of Mr. Ninja and ping pong sounds. That's cool. And last sound. There we go, ocean sounds. I'll let that run to the end. Pitch it down. Let's create a very timbrally rich hellscape. Pretty fun. Okay, so one more feature to this. Let's mix it up once more. Let's add in there you go. So it's just a static pad from the side. let's say I want to punch that in and put that somewhere specific. There's an extra degree of control where I can... Okay, so that's where my ocean sounds start. About here. So what I can do to target the starting position for my record head is double tap shift. If I just nudge that pot, make sure I'm in that position, and then tap strike, and that should define the record head to being in that position. So if I now turn up my new source, there we go. So I had dub all the way down, so that's just completely replaced that chunk of audio. So yeah, a very, it adds a lot of control, the accumulative recording mode. Cool. I'll do it. I'm going to jump to another buffer, and let's try another way of using accumulative recording. This is, what I'll do is unpatch that out of the way. Let's imagine I'm in any preset or a custom preset. It doesn't need to be the preset 6, which has accumulative recording on by default. To toggle accumulative recording on and off, you press and hold capture and tap strike. So this by nature requires activating capture. So essentially we're running out of button combinations. So this made sense from a performative aspect, where by default we're always going to be starting from the beginning in sort of traditional arbhar behavior. So if I want to record something, pause the playhead and carry it on, all I need to do is start recording actively, press capture for my initial take, and then tap shift during that, and that's going to turn accumulative recording on. When I then release, I then press again to stop it, and that's going to pause it in place. So press capture, tap strike, release, pause. And we can see it's gone into pulsing. So I can now press again, that's going to carry on where it left off, stop. If I want to then stop it after the next action, I press it again, record the last section, tap shift, press capture again, and then we're out of accumulative recording. So it takes a bit of practice, but it's ended up being a really convenient way to access this mechanic, this behavior, and sort of stop-start your record head as we go. So let's go with a very different style of voice for this example. I used psych at the end there, so I'll go back to psych, and I believe I'm in natural minor mode on this. So this will be harmonizing natural minor. I'm going to go root, third, fifth. Keep it to triads, minor triads, or minor mode triads. Out of the psych through the ara, and ara into arbhar. Here we go. So what I want to do, I want to fill this, my goal is to fill this layer with a chord, but sort of expanded harmony chord. So I'm going to keep it just to this 1 minor 7, so C or C minor 7, I'm not sure what pitch this is actually landed at, and I'm going to capture a little bit in, so I'll do the capture shift to start capturing, engage accumulative recording, and then tap again. So I only need maybe a second or so of this audio. There we go. So I've now paused it. I go to wet only. There we go. So that's where my buffer ends at the moment. And I've got this first root inversion, closed voicing version of the chord. Let's go up to a drop 3, capture a little bit of that. to third inversion, drop 2. Maybe do that same thing but with the sub-octave engaged. A little bit of that. Oops, captured a bit more than I wanted. So I must have double tapped capture there. So if I want to, not necessarily undo, but I just want to back up the record head a little bit, set that there, double tap shift, hit strike, so that's the recording now starting from that position there. And let's go with, go back to root inversion, let's go drop 3. Let's go for a more dissonant tension. Mute my input. I'm going to go back out of cumulative recording. I'll just capture a last bit. Strike, stop. So this is me back out of a cumulative recording. And this is all based around that single 1 minor 7, but then adding tenches through the interval offsets on the side and trying a few different voicing inversions. So that's me just patched up a bipolar CV from Vinca to the mod CV. So the 6 factory preset, the accumulative recording preset, it has mod CV applied to reverb, because that's kind of the sounds like this. Why wouldn't you want that? So yeah, that's a cumulative recording, which is the 6 factory preset, but is also a functionality, a feature that can be toggled on and off on the fly. Brand new to the Arbhar V2. Hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching.